do all kinds of, we did Michael Conley's book launch, we did the Jack Reacher book launch, we do a huge amount, and you're going to say, why in this little store are you doing that? And the answer is the bookstore is actually the building, and you are in the sort of, what do we want to call it? You're in the theater part, but the books ship out the back. So during COVID, we were able to convert to Zoom because we'd been streaming for years. And as a consequence, we now have about a 25,000 person mailing list, and we ship books all over the world every day. So if any of you go home and you decide that you would really love to have an autographed book or any book or whatever it is, or watch a program, you can certainly do that by going to poisonpen.com, and you can sign up for our newsletter because I write to you. I have actually written a newsletter for this bookstore every month since November of 1989. I know. It's a lot easier now. It originally went out on paper with an order form and people sent checks. Do you remember how to shop like that? But we don't do that. Anyway, it's really a pleasure to meet Zibby. I actually met her mother last year doing the Brandeis Book and Author Lunch, and she said something to me about doing something with Zibby, and then she disappeared into the crowd, and I couldn't find her. Is she here? No, Mom's
she
not here.
had plans.
So I was really delighted to hear from Zibby, who I thought I was never going to make contact with, and to welcome you all here to the store. It's also a great pleasure to have Sarah Sawyer, a debut author. Debuts is what we live for. We have a First Mystery Club, and we absolutely love talking to new authors. Lots of bookstores don't do that because sometimes it's not very financially rewarding to have a new author or a paperback author, but that's what we love doing. So we're really pleased that Sarah's here and is going to talk to Zibby. So Patrick is going to put us live, or are we live? Oh, welcome virtual audience, thank you. And when we're done, we have chairs here so that the other authors with books that you have purchased can sit back here and you can quickly get your book signed. Was that anything else that you needed to say? No, just going to be you guys. All right, so I will be a portable mic, and after their talk, if you all have questions, I'll run around and hold up the mic. And that way the virtual audience will be able to hear the questions. So thanks very much, Zibby and Sarah.
Thank you.
In case it wasn't clear from her introduction, Barbara is like a legend in this community. So it is an honor to be here. Is this working? Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. Awesome. The reason we have other authors here, too, for those who are here from the area, is that our company puts on these quarterly retreats where we go with groups of 40 to 60 guests and 4 to 6 authors, and we go to different places around the country for a weekend of great meals, great conversation, indie bookstore visits, and all of that. And this is our Zibby Retreat Scottsdale. So a lot of these people, we are all spending the weekend together and came here on a bus. And so that's what we're doing here. Sarah is one. And before I talk with Sarah more, if the other authors could stand up because they're available for signing at the end as well. So wait, don't say it yet. Don't say it yet. Don't say it yet. So just introduce yourself really fast. And for the live stream, I can repeat it. But sorry. I took you by surprise. I didn't know it was. I went off script. I'm really sorry.
I'm Annabel, Monaghan. I'm Betty Cayouette. I'm Schuster. I'm the author of By Yourself with Fucking Lilies. Was I allowed to curse? Yes.
You're doing it now.
And also glow in that word dark.
We like to think our events are all rated R.
And I'm also going to go a little off script to say that today is the publication day for the paperback of On Jewish Now that Zibby put together, a collection of essays by Jewish writers.
Thank you. It was very exciting, I have to say, to see it in the bookstore today. Very exciting. Actually, there it is. So it's a collection of 75 essays written by Jewish authors and notable figures about what it means and how it feels to be Jewish in the aftermath of October 7th. There's a lot of Jewish joy and culture and history, and some are funny, some are sad taken together, it's a good picture of what it feels like right now. And I think for a lot of people, it will make them feel less alone and feel seen. And for others, it will make them understand a little more about what it feels like for our particular group of people, which for people who are just compassionate, interested people in general would be something interesting, I think, to read. So that's my plug for it on Being Jewish Now. Anyway, okay, to Sarah. Sarah, welcome. Congratulations. And by the way, I'm also the publisher of Sarah's book, just FYI, because we also do some publishing in our company as well. So I have a vested interest in her success. And picked this book from the many, many submissions we get because it is so good. So Sarah, talk about your book. Welcome. Congratulations.
Thank you. So the undercurrent is the story of a woman named B who becomes obsessed with a girl who went missing in her neighborhood when she was a kid. She's a new mom. She's struggling. And she goes back home to sort of try to jumpstart her creativity by investigating this mystery, sort of playing detective. And she finds much more than she bargained for, learning about her own mother and the mother of her neighbor. So it has 2 different timelines and 3 different narrators, which is not anything I would recommend to anyone trying to write a book. It was hard to do, but anyway, yeah.
And yet it's an ambitious undertaking as a debut novel. How did you end up there? Did you start it thinking you would pursue that direction or not?
So I sort of feel like you choose, the tools that fit the job. I started the story because I was telling somebody I had read Madame Bovary the summer before I started writing, and I love that novel. It's such a weird story. And I started to wonder, what if it had been written by a man or by a woman? What if Emma Bovary weren't treated as frivolous but something different? And then I sort of split that into these 3 different women. So that was a sort of little origin story. Another thing that happened sort of around that same time was I have a daughter who's 18 now, but she was a sophomore at that time, and she got a crazy thyroid disease. And so remember yourself as a sophomore. She lost 40 pounds and then gained 40 pounds in the span of 6 months, which was expensive, firstly, because there were a lot of clothes involved in that, but also was also really scary, but made me really think about how many bodies women inhabit in a lifetime. You're a little girl, and then you're, some kind of adolescent, and then you're a mom, maybe. Now I don't know what I am, some kind of menopausal, who knows what, but it just, so I got really interested in that, and girlhood, and what we gain and lose in the process of growing up. So those are the 2 sort of threads behind it.
And tell everybody a little more about the different characters. And there are basically 2 different sets of relationships that you dive really deep into. So just tell a little bit more about each one.
So the first character is a woman named B, and she's sort of the present time narrator. She's the daughter of a woman named Mary, who is basically a housewife who lives in Austin, Texas, and had ambitions to be in the theater and is now in the community theater. And then their neighbor across the street is a woman named Diana, who is sort of a almost failing academic, who studies these ancient Greek figures called the Arctoi, who are Athenian girls who, this is actually true, got to live in the woods, little girls, as the handmaidens of Diana. So she's studying them.
And then also the brother.
Yeah, so there are also 2 boys. So there's Gus, who is the brother of B, and then their neighbor across the street, who is Diana's son, named Leo. And they all have a sort of very intertwined childhood friendship. And then when they grow up, it's sort of all disintegrated, and B doesn't totally understand why it's happened. So that's kind of part of what she would like to figure out. She's estranged from her brother, and she doesn't really understand why or what happened. But in the course of the story unfolding, she does.
Well, the way you wrote about that estrangement and how someone you can spend so much time with and love so much and do everything with as you grow up can somehow just slip away from you, and you don't necessarily see a path back. You don't know why it happens. And then what do you do with all of that shared history and all of that? Was there anything in your own background, or was there a childhood friend, or I'm wondering if anybody here has had a childhood friend who you were super, super close with and did everything, and then they just drifted maybe down a path that was sort of self-destructive perhaps, or you just like wanted to move them back? Like what happened? You know, it's out of your
Yeah.
control. And
Yeah, I've been really fascinated by this as I've gotten older, because I do sort of feel like the people who are meant to stay along with you do stay along with you, or return in some way back to you. Some strange amount of time might have passed, but I do think they return back to you, and I do think usually there's a reason that you did drift at the time that you did. I also think, though, I'm really interested in the way that technology has changed that now for young people. I think some relationships run their course and they should be allowed to, right? But kids now, it's like they're connected to these people and they feel like it's kind of aggressive to delete them, which I agree, it's kind of aggressive. But I don't know, I feel like it changes their relationships to relationships in a way. I feel like they don't feel like they can let anybody go. I feel like they have this, I don't know, it feels like I teach high school, so I'm watching this unfold often. You know, and they're also pretty bad at maintaining relationships. So that's a little part of what's in the novel, I think, is just thinking about the way that relationships do transform over the course of your life. And sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not. And you have to do some work to bring them back. But
And then there can be like neighborhood community fractures, like what happens with the disappearance of the girl and the reverberations of that throughout time and through multiple generations. Talk a little bit about that crime, what happened, what you wanted the readers to, what you want the readers, how you set the stage without giving things away, how you maintain the element of suspense. Like, how do you do that specifically?
I don't know. I think I read a quote from a writer on craft named Benjamin Percy, and he said that a good story is a turnstile of mysteries. So I think a mystery, I didn't really think of this as a mystery when I was writing it. I really sort of thought it was a story about these mothers. But I do really love mysteries, and I love the way that they propel you forward with just sort of your natural curiosity about what's going to happen. And I think all good stories do that in different ways. In terms of this particular story, it begins with the disappearance of a girl. She vanishes from a field, and it does reverberate in sort of strange ways throughout the story. And to make that thread pull its way through without sort of bogging down the narrative, I think I sort of thought of it as like this was a tension that I could use as a writer to my advantage to make the plot drive in a certain way. But I just like that idea of a turnstile, right? Like if you're going through something piece by piece, it requires you putting little details in that would make the reader excited, I think. I hope.
And when did you find time to do this? How did you find time to do it? How long did everything take? And what would you recommend if you were doing it again? Or maybe...
So I'm a teacher, and so in the summer I have a good amount of time to do stuff. In the fall, so right now I teach and I coach a field hockey team, and we're 14-2. I would just like to tell everyone because we're really good. It's pretty exciting. So tomorrow, if you catch me on a live stream, we're playing Loomis JP, and I need to know who wins. But anyway, so that during that time, I don't really have any time to write. In the winter, I don't coach, so I can write in the afternoons. In the summer, obviously, I have lots of time. Because I'm lazy and I don't want to get a different job in the summer. And so I just feel like I should get to do what I want. But this book I wrote kind of between a November and a June, so fairly quickly. And then I think you acquired it that fall, I think is right. And then the editing took, so that was, I think, 2022. So the editing did take a while, just sort of like the back and forth of the manuscript. But I have a hard time sitting, and so I set timers. That's my big trick. Like, surely you can sit for 45 minutes. Like, come on. So I'll set the timer, and then I'll, write. And then I feel like I'm kind of thinking about things. It's percolating in my mind as I go about my business. And then when I sit down, I sit down. But yeah.
I tried last night to set a timer. It was like after Halloween, and I was like,
Oh no, you can't do it after Halloween.
I know, it was a bad test.
Has to be
but
at
I
a
was
good
like,
time of day.
I am not going to email after 9 o'clock. I'm going to make myself go to bed.
Yeah.
I went to bed at 1. I was
No,
like,
you have to make yourself not do things. I have to make myself do things.
okay. Either way,
It's
it's good
different.
to have the alarm. That's so funny. So obviously you read all the time. You teach books. What are the things when you pick up a new book or you're browsing in a store like this that you're like, oh, that's a book that's so up my alley? Like, what is that alley?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, let me see. Right now I'm reading Elizabeth Gaskell, who, if you don't know, is a novelist from the late 1800s. So I don't know what kind of alley that is. So I picked that up.
Dusty?
Yeah,
Dark?
a dusty, dark alley, but I love her, and I had never read this book called Sylvia's Lovers. I also have, what do I have on my bedside table? Intermezzo. I have, I don't know, Jessamine Ward. I just read, I don't know. I don't read for any particular reason. I read because I read something about it, I thought I would like it, or I've been amazed entering into the world of publication because I've never read a blurb in my life, and all of a sudden I had to get blurbs. I was like, what are these blurbs? So that was kind of amazing to me. I truly don't know. I think it's mostly somebody said to me, or I feel like, I might look at it and say, oh, I'm mostly in it for the writing quality, though. I would say something inventive or fresh or something I wish I could do. Every time I read Anthony Doerr, I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. I can't do that. It's so smart. But something like that makes me feel like it's better than I could do. I like to read. Yeah.
Speaking of blurbs, by the way, she's like, oh, I've never gotten a blurb before. And then Gillian Flynn blurbed her book, which is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was exciting. Because now I know blurbs are a really big deal.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And Chris Whitaker. Did anyone
Oh,
read that?
who's the
We begin to the end.
sweetest?
So good.
He is the nicest man. He's the nicest man.
Yeah.
He is so lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was so delighted by that. Yeah.
Are there things that you see in the classroom that you feel like are untapped areas that you're like, I have to write a novel about this someday?
Oh, yes. Teaching high school is full of delicious drama. It really is. I don't often think, oh, I'll write a novel about that, but I often think this would make a really good Netflix show that I would watch for sure. Every time my daughter, she's in college now, but she would come home and tell me some story, and I'd be like, you are literally living in a Netflix episode. That is sort of tragic, and I would watch it. But yeah, I mean, they working with teenagers is so wonderful, and part of it is that they really do. They're all about living. That's just the only thing they're doing. They're not, going to the grocery store and, paying a bill or something like that. They are just like, there is a cute boy in this room and I am all about it, right? Like, so they're just, I don't know, they're just really close to the heart of the matter all the time, which I love mostly. Sometimes it's hard if you're trying to teach them, something else, but, but yeah, I think there's a lot of drama there. I think since COVID, it's felt a little different though. They're a little more fearful. I kind of feel like I just want to say to them, go live your life and enjoy it, and it'll all be okay. But the evidence, is not on my side, I think. But yeah.
That's funny. You mentioned your mom had a funny response to the book. What happened?
Oh, yes. So my book is about mothers. So I had a bit of a fear of my own mother reading the book, which was a founded fear because she is, to get this story, really, you have to just know a tiny bit about my mother, which is that she is not one to like praise anybody or anything, and she's not about like making you feel good. She's just sort of like, she's one of 6. She grew up on a farm. That's the best I can describe her. But anyway, so my father reads the book, and he is a classics professor, and he said, well, I don't normally read books like that. And I was like, okay. And that was his review. And then my mother said, and I was dreading this because one of the mothers in the book, so growing up, my mother smoked, you know, to all our shames, and she smoked a certain kind of cigarette that this woman in this novel smokes. So I was like, oh God, here we go. She's gonna she's gonna say that it's her. And she just said, well, I would like to be played by the young Meryl Streep. And I was like, okay. And that was all she said. That was the end of it. So I don't know. Apparently she's been praising it to other people who have said to me that she likes it. But I think she's like, she won't buy baby gifts at a baby shower because she wants to see the baby. I think she's just afraid to like praise an actual thing. She's a strange woman. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. I love you if you're watching. Yeah, you're great.
And has this not required any therapy? You just sort of like roll with it?
No, my sister-in-law might need therapy because she comes from a totally different kind of family. They're very like warm and whatever. And she's like, your mom is just kind of mean sometimes. I'm like, yeah, she just is. I don't know what to tell you. Like, she's just that way sometimes. I don't know. You can't take it personally. But yeah, I think I parent differently. I hope so.
So do you not feel like you're one of those people who needs some sort of external validation? Because I feel like I have not met that many people who are those kinds of people.
I don't know, except to say that I don't know. I have enjoyed many successes in my life and I like them, but I also don't do things because I am trying to get a thing either. I do a thing because I like it, and that probably is because of my parents. I think they were really into our, I'm making them sound terrible, but they're lovely. But they were very into our independence and our internal drive, I think. Like, we weren't supposed to do something because it was like supposed to be done, but because we wanted to do it. My brother failed every grade from 1st to 4th, I think, and he just kept getting shuffled along because he was such a pain. And oh, he was a trial. But he now is like a Tony Award-winning lighting designer. He's hugely successful and very internally motivated. I don't know. They're just kind of very, very hippie, hands-off, kind of, yeah, strange.
Don't they say that like every decision you make in parenting is a reaction to the way you're a parent? So
that's probably true.
Either the opposite or the same,
Yeah.
but even if you pretend you're not, you're actually just doing it in relation to what happened to you.
I'm literally like to my kids, do you want to get duct tape together and I'll see everything you do and just like love it so much? And they're like, no, I don't want that. So yeah, I do think you do that.
Amazing. Did you always know as a kid that this is like, when did you realize you had a talent in writing or that you wanted to write? And
I'm glad you think I have a talent in writing. I when I was little, I used to write a lot, and then I would say in my formative years, whatever those are, when you're in high school and college, I wrote a lot of poetry. That was not especially good poetry, but nonetheless, I wrote it. And I mostly read a lot. And then when I turned 40, I was sort of like, I had a story in mind that came from my grandmother had this wild scrapbook, and I wanted to write a story about this scrapbook. So I sat down and did that just because I had been thinking about it for a long time. And then I read it, and I was like, this is very bad, and I would not read this personally, even I wrote it. So I always say I gave myself a master class on how not to write a novel. But then I thought, well, I did that. I'm sure I can do better now that I know a little more. So yeah, so I get a huge kick out of writing. And I think that is the most fun part of publication, I think, is just that, kind of flow state, if you can find it, where you're writing and you're really thinking about the characters and inhabiting them and wondering what they might do next. I think it's very fun. And I would not have thought that I could write a whole book, but now I'm like, anybody can write a whole book, right? I think it's, it's a great creative exercise, really. And it made me feel, doing any of those projects made me feel much more engaged in the world, much more curious and open. And I think that's the reason to do it, just like it's the reason to read anything, is to be more curious and open. So yeah.
And so your kids are not reading this book, or are they reading?
So my daughter read it at her job this summer, and she read it in about a day and was like, Mom, this is amazing. This is so good. My son, bless his heart, would rather scrub a toilet with his mouth than read a book. And he read it also. He really read it, every word, slowly and painfully. And it took him about a month, but he was like, this is amazing. It's so good. He's like, if every book was like that, I would read them. I was like, well, many books are like this, and you just don't read them. So anyway, we'll get somewhere with that. But yes, they did both read it, which was great. Yeah.
And for the aspiring writers in the room, because I know there are some, what is some advice? What is the advice to keep going? What is some craft advice, or just what would you say?
I think that this is what I tell my students, is just basically like, your ego is not your amigo here. If you are worried about, I don't know, the product, I don't think that is very useful. I think it's very useful to think of it as play, as a project, as a thing that you're doing that doesn't necessarily have consequence. And I think that can be very freeing. I think there are a million reasons why not to sit down and write every day, of course, right? Everybody has a toilet to scrub or something. But I do think, as I said, that it can be a time spent with yourself that's like the very best time. And I think it makes you ideally better when you're out and about. But I think there's no reason not to do it. If it's bad, who cares? And right, you can do more or learn or something. And I think to think of it, like I said, I coach, and we actually have little bracelets this year, and the one says next play, because that's what we say all the time, because the girls worry about making mistakes, but it's like, it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter at all, because you just keep going. And that's the thing I think that is most important, is just to continue, right? Because we don't need fewer people who are thoughtful and read and think, right? I think we need more. Yeah.
Amazing. We can open up for questions. Is that okay?
Who would like to? Okay, let's start here.
Hi, thanks so much for both being here. My question is, I'm always kind of curious about the title and the cover of the book. Did you have any say in the title? What did that kind of look like with the process?
Yeah, so I think, so the title was the title I came up with from the beginning, which I'm glad, because it's dear to me, and I know so often they get changed in the process. And I liked the title a lot just because it has both sort of literal and metaphorical, resonances. The cover, it was a wild,
Where is Grassa?
wild process.
Grassa,
Ooh,
stand up.
Grassa, bless your heart.
Grassa is also our cover design manager and has designed many of the covers from the books that we published.
Yes, this one. Yes, this is Grassa's. So in the beginning, we had a cover that I think we liked, and then it went to sales, and they did not like it. So then it had to be redone, and then Zibby, unlike many publishers, does include authors on the cover conversation, but I bet Zibby wished that she did not include me, because they kept bringing these lovely covers, but the house is set in Texas, and I was like, no, like that is not a house from Texas. That is a house from wherever, New Hampshire. And then so we were like battling about this and back and forth. And then Grassa or Kathleen or somebody found this artist, and I just loved the way that looked. And I'm glad that, you liked it too. And I love the water, and I love the kind of sepia tone and the house. So to me, it really matched the feel of the story, which I think, I don't know. It's like you don't want to pick up a book because it has a certain kind of cover and then read it and be like, what? So I think covers are really important. And I think I love this cover, and I'm happy with it. Yeah. Grassa, you should talk about
yeah,
this.
you should give a behind the scenes of this
I was
cover,
the-
because it was
The
a
thorn
journey.
in your side, I'm sure.
Oh, I thought you wanted one.
This cover took months and months and months.
I'm sorry.
We looked at, Kathleen and I, Kathleen's our executive editor at Zibby Books, we looked at 150 different houses. They weren't working. Sarah's feedback kept coming. No, that's not an Austin house. And then we're like, but this is like from a Texas photographer. What do you mean? But yeah, no, I'm so thrilled with how it came out. There were, maybe we should show the variations tomorrow.
Honestly, you should,
Like,
because it was
there's
really amazing.
30 plus.
That deck that
The
we
deck.
went through. Oh yeah.
There's 30 plus variations of this cover.
Yeah.
I mean, was just so thrilled with how it came out. I really love this artist, and yeah. But should I say more about the cover process?
Anyway, most
Yeah.
people don't get
But-
any input.
Yes.
So
we really involve our authors in our covers, and most publishers don't do that. Good and a bad thing.
Yeah. Sometimes our covers then are
we're
a
still
little
friends,
late.
right, Grassa?
Hi, I have them. Sorry, I'll give it to you next. Okay. So I was super curious when I read the synopsis and it said that there was a mother that was dealing with some postpartum issues. That really just caught my interest. That's something I personally am invested in. And you touched a little bit about how the different stages of motherhood and the different stages of girlhood. And I was just kind of curious where that particular storyline came from, especially because B doesn't seem to know that she's maybe struggling, but her husband has an idea of it. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah. So I live at a boarding school, and so my mother always says that I was really lucky because when she had my brother and me, she was in Minnesota, kind of alone on a neighborhood street. You know, kind of no other people her age. And when I had my kids, there were 100 other mothers with kids, right? So we all did a lot of chit-chatting, and my closest friend really struggled with postpartum, to the point that like I had to go get her out of her bed and drag her and throw her baby in the stroller, and we're going. And so that really struck me because it's just so, it just comes on so strong, and it's so difficult. I also babysat when I was in high school for a woman who had postpartum, and I was like 14, and I babysat her newborn for 2 months in the summer, and I never realized the whole time that she was actually upstairs the whole time I was babysitting. And I kept being like, why are they leaving me with this newborn? But she was actually in bed, and the husband had to work, and I was just like, this is weird that they're leaving me with her, but I wasn't actually alone. And so those kind of two experiences really struck me. And I myself did not experience that, but even I was saying to someone earlier, kind of like even in the best of circumstances, even in the easiest, if you have the easiest of roads, it's still, I found, really hard, like a very, very difficult thing. And I did not personally feel any of the magical rainbows and puffy lambs that I was supposed to be feeling in my soul. I just sort of felt like, oh, what is happening, you know? So that experience is in there with B for sure. Yeah.
It was about the cover. I get bored with covers, you know, and I'm attracted to a cover. I visually see it first. If I'm just walking in a bookstore to browse and look around, and I think people copy each other. And I know there are graphic artists out there that need a job. I mean, they need to employ some people to do better covers. But I like this cover, and I think you've been copied already. So it's a
Really?
beautiful cover. Yeah.
I'll interject a comment and say that the author has the copyright on the words in the text in the book, but the publisher, maybe Zibby's an exception here, and yay if you are, the publisher has a right to the cover art and the title and the whole production, the typeset and the whole bit. So the author actually sometimes has cover approval. Often it's not the right title. It's a whole different thing, and I think readers often assign responsibility to authors unfairly because it doesn't work. There are also trends in it. You know, like if you look at the romance books, not the romantasy, but the other, they all look like cartoons right now. And do you remember when it was all the fuck me pumps and the, you know, I mean, there was that whole thing, that when all you saw was the back of the leg with the stocking seam and the Louboutins. And, that was a trend. And so you just have to kind of go with that if you're an author and not get yourself all upset.
It is funny to go into a store, though, and you see a table, and it's like all the books are apparently different, but all the covers are
Exactly.
very much the same.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else have a question? Am I got my back to you? Over here. Sorry. You all keeping score? Okay, great.
I just wondered if you have another book that you're working on, or what are you
I
working
do.
on now?
I have a couple little projects going. I have, let me see. I have a book about a boy who is sort of similar in genre to this one. And it involves an accident, an on-purpose accident is what I'll say about that one. And then I'm working on one right now that is sort of about what I was talking about earlier, about what happens to relationships in the modern age, and it involves an illuminated manuscript and an AI bot. We'll see. I don't know.
Sarah, I'm back here. So, question: do you find that now that you have your first publication, is it harder to write the next book? Is there more expectations? Or is it still just for the love of writing?
Oh, I don't really have any expectations, to be honest. I keep being like, oh, look at this. Like, this hotel is really nice. Like, look at all these nice people. Yeah, I don't really have any particular expectations. I want, if I'm going to bother to make something, I want it to be as good as I can make it at that moment. But I've never been a person that was like, oh, I imagine myself doing X, Y, Z as a writer. And I think, maybe that has to do with my mother, but I think it has to do with just feeling in general, philosophically, like I just think it's more important to do small things well in your daily life. And I'm very glad to have this out there, and I feel very proud of it, but I'm definitely very proud of like my children and those kinds of things too. So I feel like it's maybe not very fraught. Sometimes I do talk to writers who are just like seem just like they're clawing, and that feels really hard to me because it's a business like any other, and it's a business that really doesn't have strong guarantees of success. I think the strong guarantee is that you will fail a lot of times. I was telling my son, I was like, it's a little bit similar to becoming like a professional baseball player or something. It's like, I'm sure there's many wonderful baseball players / writers out there who never see a field, right? Or never get their book published. I think there's just a lot of luck involved. So I'm grateful for that. But yeah.
To speak to the question of second novel, by the way, I just finished my next novel, which the edits were due today, the second draft. So I had to finish it on the plane. And I will say it is like excruciatingly difficult. And I'm like, what if I can never do it again? What if it's not going to be good? What if I could only have like one story? What if I can only write one character? So I think, I don't know, I guess for people who have anxiety, it is tough. But having interviewed like 2,000 people, I would say the bulk of authors have anxiety. So there you go.
Probably true. Yeah.
I have a question specifically about this story. So I loved how each character, at least in the 1987 timeline, had this almost like a relationship with the field, the setting. Can can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, it almost served as another character in a way. I'd just love to hear what your thinking was about that.
Sure. So I think part of the reason that I was so insane about the cover is that is that that field. So my brother read the novel and was like, "Oh yeah, that is the field next to our house where we grew up." And I remember very vividly standing in that field. We all went to the field. We were all not allowed to go to the field, you know. So that setting is not at all fictional in that way. So it did feel like a living thing to me. In that it's, for me, a marker of how I felt as a child. I can really, in a physical way, bring myself back to that space. So that sort of touchstone for those characters was very easy for me to imagine. And I think that, you know, in terms of the events of the field, I was trying in a way to capture the way I think that childhood can feel sometimes, which is like, it's a little bit scary or edgy or dangerous sometimes. You don't totally know what's going on. You feel like there's something happening that you don't quite have access to. So that, I think, was part of what that field was about. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
When you were starting out, were you placing your work in a genre? And did you think about what people expect in a particular genre? How much did that sense of the marketplace influence you?
I don't have a sense of the marketplace. So I did have a sense that, you know, there needs to be a pitch for the book. So I was thinking, you know, I love Tana French, for example. And the reason I love Tana French is because I feel like her writing is very spare and precise and beautiful. And so I had in my mind something like that, but at the same time, it's not really a mystery in a very typical sense. And I think it's called literary suspense. Is that what it's called? But I didn't write for a particular genre. Sort of like I was saying with the timelines, I think you just write the story the way that you want to write the story. And then I think if in the editing process there are certain things that you can kind of hone or refine so that it fits more squarely in a way, once you're in the sort of publishing money side of things, I think it makes sense to make those changes if they make sense for the story. But I don't think it makes sense to write for genre unless that's what you are doing and that's what you're trying to do. For this story, I was sort of like, I'm writing this story about these three women and we'll see what happens, you know. But yeah, it did turn out to be more suspenseful than I imagined it would.
Anyone else? No? All right, well then I'll wander back up. My sympathies are with Zibby because I have interviewed hundreds of authors over this time, and I will tell you that second book syndrome is a real thing. And the thing is, the more successful your first book was, the weightier the expectations are for you to write a second book. And it has, in some cases, really paralyzed people. Thomas Harris took 10 years to write a book after Silence of the Lambs, for example. So it's kind of a mixed blessing to be super successful right off the bat.
Luckily, I was not super successful, so I'm all good now. You know.
I wasn't implying that. Not a bit. Not a bit. But no, I mean, I think it's really hard. It sounds to me like Sarah is kept writing in an overall perspective of her life and other things that are important to her. So a lot of it depends on your career drive. Some of it just depends on money. I mean, you know, people who are being published are actually writing for money. Well, they'd like to be. And one of the things that's going on in the industry at the moment is that the big publishers are getting so big that the entry opportunities for new authors are dramatically diminished. The good news is they're getting so big that's kind of like the aftermath of a forest fire when the big trees come down and now there's all this undergrowth coming up. But they are rarely able to sell enough books to pay authors a living wage. So you have to decide whether, writing is going to be a full-time occupation for you or whether it's something you
That is
can
why
do.
I'm a teacher.
Right. And then, there's money from television and all the rest of it. It's remarkable how having anything made into film, whether a movie or long-form television, which has been a boon for authors, can make a real sales difference. There have been some really bad ones. Sarah Paresky had a terrible movie. Louise Penny's been unlucky twice. But it doesn't actually hurt the books. The books are still the books. However bad or however good the TV is, the books are still the books. But, if an author catches a break like that, it makes a huge difference in sales. So we couldn't sell a single Colin Dexter until Morse appeared on television. I kid you not, and then it just went through the roof. So what are your experiences as a publisher? I wanted to ask you, you've been talking to Sarah, but why is it that you're a book publisher, kid?
Oh my gosh, I don't even know. I'm so tired. No, I'm kidding. I wanted to become a book publisher. Well, I actually didn't want to become a book publisher, but I was talking to so many authors on my podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, and I kept hearing the same things over and over again about the industry and how unfair it had become and how disappointed authors were with their experiences and who was going to fix publishing, and it was broken. And after a while I was like, all right, enough. Like, let's just try to fix it then. Like, what could we do? And I thought about it, and I don't know, it took a lot of time. I didn't just do it overnight. I almost was an imprint with a bigger publisher, and then I almost started, and finally I teamed up with someone who had started a publishing house. But the real goal for me is to try to give authors the experience that I think they deserve, because I think authors are like the biggest rock stars ever. And I grew up just like idolizing, and I still do. I still get so excited to meet an author who I admire. Like, that's just that magic of it. So the thought that all these people and I alongside was trying to like write my own books, that they would get to the finish line and just be so demoralized and disappointed felt so sad to me, that I wanted to see if I could do something about it and create a house where every book was a lead title, and books weren't acquired based on follower count, but based on the quality of the manuscript, and a community so that authors could get to know each other in the same house and learn from each other and feel supported. And book sales are so unpredictable, but you can help what the author's experience is like. So to the extent that I wanted to try to do that and experiment with like brand partnerships and like just try to take it more into this century, that was the goal. It has been harder than I thought, but hard doesn't scare me.
It is hard. Actually, 24 years ago, my husband and I had the same idea, and Poison Pen Press was born. If you look over there in the British Library Crime Classics, that's a program we brought into play. And we did it for 20 years, but it required more energy and more capital. And after 20 years, the year I turned 80, which was 4 years ago, my husband said to me, we either have to, no, it's really true. The bookstore is my passion project. I just do this for fun. This is actually a not-for-profit bookstore. But anyway, my husband said to me, we either have to go big or we have to go home, essentially. So we sold Poison Pen Press to Random House. And interestingly enough, if you looked at last Sunday's New York Times bestseller list, a Poison Pen Press book was the #1 bestseller in book and ebook form. And we had 6 books on the paperback bestseller list, #1 all the way. None of them are mine. That's my point, is that all of that is a result of taking what we started, but turning it over to Random House, which had the resources and all the rest of it to make it actually work. And, I think if I'd been your age when we started, I might have gone for it. But 80 is hard. And I was thinking when you said that about women and their bodies, really up until 80, there was always the expectation that somehow you can make it better. And now my goal is just to wake up without pain every day.
I feel like, yes.
No, it's true. You really do inhabit a lot of different bodies, right? So thank you all very much for your attention. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
It's a pleasure. And at this point, if Sarah and Zibby and the other 3